Welcome to Kenwood Church. Today we're continuing in the sermon series Radical Faith, where we talk about how faith executes God's plan. Faith executes God's plan. Radical faith is more than believing the plan will work. Faith actually follows through with the plan. Faith trusts and obeys. Hebrews 11:29 and 30 say these words. I'll be reading in the New International Version, as is my custom. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho, after the army had marched around them for 7 days. Faith executes God's plan. Point number one, faith walks toward a sea with no bridge. Faith walks toward a sea with no bridge. Here's a story of a tightrope walker. There was a tightrope walker who did incredible aerial feats. All over Paris, he would do tightrope acts at tremendously scary heights. Then he had succeeding acts. He would do it blindfolded. Then he would go across the tightrope blindfolded, pushing a wheelbarrow. He would keep adding more elements to this amazing feat. An American promoter read about this in the papers and wrote a letter to the tightrope walker saying, "Tightrope, I don't believe you can do it, but I'm willing to make you an offer. For a very substantial sum of money, besides all your transportation fees, I would like to challenge you to do your act over Niagara Falls." Now, Tightrope wrote back, "Sir, although I have never been to America and seen the falls, I'd love to come." Well, after a lot of promotion and setting the whole thing up, many people came to see the event. Tightrope was to start on the Canadian side and come to the American side. Drums roll and he comes across the rope, which is suspended over the treacherous part of the falls, blindfolded. And he makes it across easily. The crowds go wild, and he comes to the promoter and says, "Well, Mr. Promoter, now do you believe I can do it?" "Well, of course I do. I mean, I just saw you do it." "No," said Tightrope. "Do you really believe I can do it?" "Well, of course I do. You just did it." No, said Tightrope. "Do you believe I can do it?" "Yes," said the promoter. "I believe you can do it." "Good," said Tightrope. "Then get in the wheelbarrow." This is a nice story. Makes you ask, how often do we say that we believe Christ can do it, but refuse to get in the wheelbarrow? Faith does the unthinkable. Israel knew God would provide. When Pharaoh finally let them go and they were sent off toward the sea, they knew God would do something. Now, I don't know if they had in mind the picture that I have from Charlton Heston's The Ten Commandments of this water up at the edges holding off while they walked across dry land. I don't know what they imagined, but God parted the Red Sea, and they were able to walk across on dry land. And Hebrews 11 says they were able to do that because of their faith. Because of their faith, they were able to walk on dry land. Now, here's an illustration. The Israelites were able to cross on dry land because of their faith. When the Egyptians tried to come across, they discovered that faith makes all the difference. Our passage says that Egypt tried walking on dry ground. Egypt drowned because actions are not the same as faith. Although they were moving toward that dry ground in the same way as the children of Israel. The children of Israel went through the water and got through the other side, but we discovered that the Egyptians were drowned. The ground was dry because of faith, not because of moisture content. In other words, faith is what made all the difference in the world. But faith made a difference because they walked toward the sea, and when they got to the sea, they walked across on dry ground. They executed God's plan. Even though they had no idea how God was going to make this happen, they did it. Faith does. Sometimes we get locked into this battle of whether faith is just what I believe in my heart or whether it's what I do. And I agree with James, it's got to be both. You can do good things without faith, and it's not the same as doing good things with faith. it's also not the same as doing nothing and yet saying you believe. I assume that if the Israelites had stayed with Pharaoh, just saying, hey, I believe that God could get us out of here, but I'm not going to worry about that, they would have never escaped Egypt. Second of all, faith attacks the city with no weapons. Faith attacks the city with no weapons. Faith is a strange creature indeed. There's a story about Jordan, a 3-year-old boy from Rhode Island, that he went down to the seacoast to fly a kite. Never having flown a kite before, Jordan had obvious doubts. His father assured him that all was well and the kite would go up as planned. As Jordan unraveled the string and watched the kite go up, he was heard to say, "I knew it would fly, Daddy. You said it would." Simple statement, profound implications. The Israelites were going to march around the city, blow some trumpets, and break some pitchers, and city walls were going to fall. Faith understands a marching band can be an army in the hands of God. Horns, pitchers, shouting, marching can be a military strategy when God is involved. The real world responds to acts of faith. The wall fell. Foolish acts of faith impact a world built on absolute truths. So even though people can't explain why things happen, the actions of faith can make a difference in a world that is indifferent to faith. Faith executes God's foolish plan. Edna Butterfield tells this story. My husband Ron once taught a class of mentally impaired teenagers. Looking at his students' capabilities rather than their limitations, Ron got them to play chess, restore furniture, and repair electrical appliances. Most important, he taught them to believe in themselves. Young Bobby soon proved how well he had learned that last lesson. One day he brought in a broken toaster to repair. He carried the toaster tucked under one arm and half a loaf of bread under the other. Faith executes God's foolish plan. Faith believes. That little boy in that story, Bobby, believed that he could get that toaster fixed, so he had to have the bread ready for some toasting. See, faith is about execution. It's not about hypothetical belief. It's not about what you think might be true. It's about what you believe and what you do because of that belief. It's faithful execution. It's following through with what faith demands. There is a result. We're called to trust, faith, and obey, as the old song says, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Are you ready today to trust God and not just trust Him, but to also obey Him? Are you ready to step out on faith and do those things that others might think are foolish, but that you know is what God wants you to do? Our world is full of people who believe many things that do very little in light of their belief. What are you going to do today because of your belief? My challenge for you today is this. Write down 2 times when you stopped living by faith after beginning in faith. So I want you to write down 2 times when you stopped living by faith after beginning in faith. Most of us, I'm sure, have many more stories than 2, to where we started off faithfully following God, and then we tapered off, and maybe even at the end we didn't do what God wanted us to do at all. What was the result of your decision to stop being faithful? So what was the result? When you stopped being faithful, what happened? So I have a question for you today. What do you need to faithfully complete today and in the future? In other words, what is God calling you to do through faith today that you need to complete or that you need to do in the future? Faithful execution, doing what God has called us to do, is what faith is all about. Faith executes God's plan. I pray that we all might get an awakening and that we might all do those things that God would have us to do, that we might live faithful lives. Faith executes God's plan. God bless you. See you next week.